Really? Fantastic.
Right. Oh,
Blimey.
How long have you actually been collecting Noritake porcelain?
About a year and a half. But the original piece that I started with was my mother's, which I've had about 30 years, something like that.
Which is, you brought it with you?
These two vases.
This pair?
Yes.
Okay.
She actually swapped me because she fancied the pair that I had, so we swapped. And I had a large mantelpiece which to fit on.
So it took you 30 years really to get into the idea of collecting the stuff?
Yeah, we never knew what it was at all. It had, we'd never heard of it. So we just happened to see some other pieces with the same mark on.
Okay, so what was the first purchase?
Was the bowl.
This bowl here?
Yes.
I think what is remarkable about Noritake is that 25 years ago, you couldn't give the stuff away.
No.
Nobody wanted it. And then, we'd get the odd American turning up and buying it, and it really has become very much a sort of a US-dominated market.
Yes.
However, having said that, I know that you're aware that there is a UK collectors club.
Yes, there is. Yes.
And there's a lot more information coming out about Noritake.
Yes.
What is great about Noritake, I think, is the fact that it was very much an international concern.
Yes.
Because the design team were in New York, headed by an Englishman, making porcelains in Japan for the European and the American market.
Yeah.
So it was all very clever. We think of international companies today.
They did copy a lot of other styles. I mean, there's quite a bit that's on the style of Wedgwood as well.
Oh, yes.
So there's quite a lot of different styles.
Well, the one to look out for is the abstract designs that you often get on plates, designed by none other than Frank Lloyd Wright.
I don't like it.
You don't like it?
No, I like the pretty pieces.
Oh, do you?
Rather.
Right, you've got definite set views about what you want to collect in your Noritake.
Yes.
I think where they win is, as with that bowl and this piece, whereas in Staffordshire in the sort of 1920 period, much of what was being mass-produced was being transfer printed.
Right.
Noritake went one better, and they actually hand-painted pieces.
Yes.
Now, if you look at this, each one of those roses is entirely hand-painted,
Yes.
and that makes it special. Also, they didn't go easy on the gilt as well, so it's what I call bright and bonny.
Yes.
I've got to say that the pair of vases are quite splendid.
Yes.
I think that I don't know how much you paid for them, but if I can just say that I would expect today that you would have to pay around about £200 to £250.
Yes, we paid £210 for them. So
that was a near one, wasn't
it?
Yes. And all I can say is thank you for sharing a little bit of early 20th century Japan with us here in Hartlepool.
Lovely, you're welcome. Thank you.
This is a very English setting for a very Japanese doll. And here she stands in her kimono, looking, I have to say, slightly overdressed for today's conditions, this hot sunshine. And in my hand, I've got a card, a business card, which says, Mr. Takayuki Eguchi from Nagoya, Japan. Any connection? I'd like to hope there is.
That was my father. He wasn't 17 years old because that was the age when he left Japan to finish his education in Great Britain.
And give me a date for that.
But he arrived in 1914, just before the Great War, when, of course, Japan and Britain were allies.
And had very close ties. So your father came to England.
Yes.
Did he bring the doll with him?
No.
Ah, there's more to this, is there?
Well, there's my father, and he fell in love with this English lady, my mother.
Yes.
And this is my grandfather, Komaichi, who was outraged that his eldest son was going to make a marriage in England.
Oh, so this wasn't the plan. The plan was for him to get his education, go home and marry some...
Well, there was a marriage already arranged. So it was loss of face for grandfather.
Of course.
It was an outrage. He said, come home or I will cut off your allowance. So my very stubborn father said, I'll get a job. And he was very distressed because he loved his father. His father had always been most loving. And they had their first daughter, Alma, but she died when she was 9 of meningitis. So it was a terrible tragedy, and Komaichi was so shocked to lose a child. that he relented, forgave his son, and invited the whole family to Japan. So that is what this is about. It's about the reconciliation of my father and my mother meeting for the first time the Japanese family.
Then the doll you got in Japan, or
grandfather, very generously, he loved my mother, he loved his grandchildren, and he commissioned this doll to be made by the master doll maker in Kyoto. He commissioned the most beautiful doll for my brother, which was a samurai on a horse, which was, I always preferred to this rather prissy doll.
Yes, I would have been in your camp, actually.
I love that.
But she is just gorgeous.
He also commissioned kimonos for my mother and myself to be made too. So we came back embarrassingly loaded with many, many, many boxes of gifts.
How wonderful. And can I picture you in a kimono like this? Was it similar?
Oh yes, it was very similar. Very similar with the darker colour outside and then this radiant sort of colour showing through.
Amazing,
My
isn't
petticoat
it?
was the same golden orange colour.
Fantastic. These dolls are actually known as Ichimatsu's play dolls, and they were very popular throughout the whole of the Meiji period, which was 1868 through to 1912. The head is made out of papier-mâché, but which has then been covered with a kind of gesso, which has taken an extraordinary sort of, it almost has a feel of and finish of porcelain. It's an incredible finish on the surface of the face there. The hands also papier-mâché and similarly finished. And of course this glorious costume made as the full-size costume would have been. She really is the symbol of the family reunited, isn't she?
Yes, she is.
Well, she ought to be priceless, but everything has a price. And I would say that her value to a collector would be something around £1,000, which, in the light of what it represents to your family, seems like a snip.
Oddly enough, this was made in the same place as that.
Oh, right.
It's from Kutani in Kaga province in Japan, about 1880.
Right.
What's so nice about it is the subject matter.
Yes,
You've
lovely.
got this wonderful, fat... I'm not even sure he's an owl. I think he's an owlet. He's a baby
Yes,
owl,
I
isn't
think
he?
so too.
And what's nice, though, is the way he's sitting there sort of looking at his lunch.
Yes.
He's about to put this claw down and go,
Yes.
oh, breakfast, lunch, lovely. You liked it too, did you?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely lovely.
Yeah.
It's particularly the shape. You want to touch it
You want
all
to touch
the time.
it, yes. And of course, the colour around the back is quite breathtaking.
Yes.
And this particular green colour, very characteristic of Kutani, as is this mixture of black on green. Again, something you would expect to come from there. Well, I think it's a marvellous thing. Where did this one come from?
Well, that was left to my mother. She'd visited the house of an elderly couple who did collect antiques and admired it. In fact, as she went past it, she stroked it and didn't meet them again for many years. But when the wife died, she left it to my mother in her will.
Oh, wonderful.
Because she'd admired it
Oh,
so.
isn't that nice? I think that would fetch somewhere between 1,800 and £2,500.
Wow. Well, we must continue to keep it on a high shelf.
Well, it's a good-looking bowl. It's a shame about the box. Have you got anything better at home?
Yes, there is a very nice box, but it was inaccessible. It's in my cousin's attic.
Why don't you keep it in it?
Because it's on display on a bookcase most of the time.
Oh, I see. The bowl is actually on display.
Yes.
Well, tell me where you got it.
Well, it doesn't actually belong to me. It's my mother's, and it came down through her side of the family. It was my great-great-grandfather's.
Right.
He gave it to his wife in 1901, and he bought it in Japan on one of his voyages. He was on one of the ships, one of the shipping lines from Liverpool.
At first sight, what we have is a European shape. This is a completely un-Japanese idea, this serrated rim. It's almost like a cut glass bowl. And then this stem is peculiarly un-Oriental. It's completely and utterly European in style. But then the painting, now what painting? This is absolutely stupendous. I mean, this is the bowl that ought not to be sort of standing up on the sideboard, but it's the sort of thing you really have to look at almost with magnifying glass.
It's very detailed.
But the painting on here, these peonies in this garden, is absolutely gorgeous. And the gold has been put on at the very end, and nothing has been spared here. Beautiful thing. The whole thing then takes place against this dense iron red millefiori ground. And then we come around this side and we have an out-of-doors party of young ladies, a child, out enjoying themselves in a pine grove. It's beautiful, absolutely stunning. But then, inside, that's where it really happens. That is superb painting. In fact, you have a painter in the garden being watched by a number of children and an old man, and there is his pot of brushes. Fantastic detail, and all of these clouds done in this minute pointillist gilding technique. It's a superb tour de force. I suspect it was an exhibition piece. I really do. I think it's such high quality.
I understand that it was shown in an exhibition and it won a prize.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Which exhibition do you know?
I don't know which exhibition, but the exhibition was on at the time when my great-great-grandfather was there, and he quickly had a look and he decided to buy this as it had won a prize.
Well, that's a pretty good thing to buy, isn't it? Because this is absolute top of the range. The Japanese today actually acknowledge how amazing some of these export-ware pieces were and will pay a lot of money for it. So I would think today a bowl of this caliber is probably going to be worth between £3,000 and £5,000.
Oh my goodness. Right.
It's a family piece. It's just been handed down through the family and it's ended up with us.
It's actually Japanese, and it's the class of ware which is popularly called Satsuma, which is a high-fired earthenware with a crackled glaze, and the crazing on it is actually part of it. It's not a defect. It developed really in response to Japan opening up to the West, which it did in 1853-54. And the Satsuma type wares, one of the great makers was a man called Sobei Kinkazan. He was part of a long family of potters. Now, Kinkazan was interesting because he had this factory turning out this stuff, and if you just went in and bought a piece, then you went away again. If you said, have you got any really good bits, you were taken to his own house, and he had a decorating studio attached to his house where all the best stuff was done. So it was a two-tier manufacturing process. This is one of the top pieces. This is a really knockout piece. It's in a form of sort of a tea canister, but I don't think it was ever meant for serious use. On the bottom we would expect to find, and indeed have got, his mark, Kin-ko-zan, and then the bottom character is tsukuru, which means made. Round it, what appears to be just simply decoration, but actually it's in very stylized characters. It says Dai Nihon, which is Great Japan, and then Kyoto. The decoration on here is just breathtaking. It is just unbelievable that somebody could take a brush with enamel colours on it and do this extraordinarily detailed painting. The scenes are absolutely typical. We've got a woman and her daughter there. We've got a mountainous landscape. We've got a cockerel perched on a blue rock. We've got a couple of children. Another landscape with figures going up to a sort of house in the mountains. And here, which is very nice, a sort of dog-like character, which looks more like a cross between a dog and a cat. The sort of grey clouds, which appear to be up here, up close, that's every single dot is painted with the single hair of a brush, and that's actual gold, and that's continued over here. Now, Kinkazan, one of his introductions was this dark blue enamel, which he then gilded. And the problem is with it, the gold doesn't like sticking on it very much and is usually worn off. Here, it's with very slight wear, it's still in pristine condition. The nice thing about this one is that some of the panels are actually signed by the painter, and you've got at least two painters on this piece. And this one is one I can read. It says Oshizan. It's, I think, a remarkable find. I mean, it's as good as a piece of Satsuma as I've ever seen on the roadshow.
Really?
Really. Where do you have it at home?
Stuck in my husband's office.
Whereabouts in his office? I don't like the sound of offices. Offices sound like
On a
crashing about
shelf.
telephones,
No.
files.
No, on a
shelf. It's safe, is it?
Well, I thought so. I'll put it in a glass cabinet when I get
Put it
home.
in a glass cabinet when you get home because it's worth £8,000 to £10,000.
Blimey. Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing it in.
What was the story behind this? Was this something you went out and bought? Or?
No, I believe my grandmother bought it for me when I was just about 4 or 5 years old.
So we're talking mid-30s?
Yes, mid-30s. Yes.
And what's lovely about this, first of all, it's unusual to have a Japanese toy. Celluloid, which of course was very inexpensive.
Yes.
But the thing that really makes me laugh is here they've called it the Pinocchio on the screen stage. Obviously, nothing to do with Pinocchio at all, but they were trying to cash in on the story. And it's very nicely lithographed and decorated here. And of course, because it's such a sort of fragile material, not many of these have actually survived in decent condition. Now, it's blowing a gale out here, but I'd like to see whether it works, because it's got this completely nutty action, hasn't it?
The little thing, just give it a little.
She makes me feel a bit queasy.
Oh, yes, yes.
Because it survived, and it is really a miracle that it survived at all, and because Japanese toys from this period are so popular, it's going to be worth quite a bit of money.
Is it? I wasn't sure if it was worth anything at all, but rather sort of an interest.
Yes. Well, it is. It's certainly going to have a value of between perhaps £400 and £500.
You surprise me. You really do, because I don't know how much it would cost in those days, but it would be just a few shillings, I would imagine.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled about that.
Tell me, you keep this in a cardboard box in the attic?
No, not at all. No. It has an honoured place in an alcove in our sitting room.
It must look wonderful. Well, it's clearly a Buddhistic figure.
Yeah.
And Buddhistic figures are extremely difficult to attribute as to where they came from. Because like Russian icons, the idea is to keep the things the same as possible throughout generations. But once we start looking at it, maybe there are some clues. We've got on here some characters which are cut out of metal.
Yeah.
Which is very unusual. I haven't seen that before.
I didn't know that.
But the characters are either North Indian or Tibetan.
Yeah.
So that, we think,
Yeah.
maybe is where it comes from.
All right.
The mandala here is carved with scrolling clouds. We come down here. The Buddha is standing on a lotus throne, which is his symbol. The lotus is the symbol of purity. We come down to these very strange and unusual flower leaf scrolls, which I've not seen before, to a group of 6 immortals who've got various attributes, and these are Buddhist immortals, or Lohan. And then down to the bottom, we've got a dragon, a sort of kailin, I think it's supposed to be, a turtle, and the turtle supports the world in part of the mythology. Now, the quality of the carving, because this is all carved wood, which has then been gilded, this is gold leaf on here, is of very, very high quality. Much better quality than one would have expected had it come from Tibet or India. Nor does it say to me China, oddly enough. But when we get back up here again, the quality says to me nowhere else but Japan.
Oh, now that is interesting. That I hadn't thought.
At this date, and I think we're talking about
Right.
1890, 1900,
Yeah,
this was made in Japan,
right.
possibly for export to
Oh, right.
Tibet.
Right.
I think it's absolutely splendid. Because it's Japanese, it's going to be worth more than if were it anything else. More than Chinese, more than Indian, more than Tibetan. I think we're looking at about 10 to 15,000 pounds.
Right. Oh.
I was left it by my godmother, who was also my mother's sister. It was left to me as a jewellery box, but I don't know the history of it really.
Do you use it for jewellery, or
No, I don't.
It has these
No.
little drawers inside which would accommodate jewellery, and they have rather nice wooden linings. So that would be absolutely right. And in the old days, when it was made, it might have been intended for such things.
Right.
But how did your family come by it?
Well, my aunt was local and she worked as a manageress at a shop in Clitheroe, and apparently an elderly gentleman took a fancy to her and kept bringing her presents. Apparently he was well travelled, and that's all I know. I think she was given it either just before or just after the war, but I'm not sure of the date.
Yes. Do you know whether he travelled in Japan?
I've always thought that it was Japanese, and I thought there might possibly be some bronze in it. Somebody once told me they thought there was some bronze in it, but it's not all bronze.
Yes. Well, there are a whole variety of metals in here. If we look at the front door, you've got a flaked gold background, which has been damascened into the background of bronze. And so to damascene a metal, you take a rough file, and then into that burr, rather like Velcro, you hammer another metal and polish it until it takes on this absolutely smooth surface that they've got here. This little character is a man called Fukarokuju. Now, Fuku, believe it or not, is Japanese for happiness.
Right. Yes.
So he is the god of happiness.
I did wonder if the figures meant anything at all. Yes.
And round the side here, you've got another of the gods of good fortune and happiness, a man called Daikoku, recognisable because he's got a little hammer. And inside the drawer here, I noticed two cranes, and the cranes are again symbols of long life and happiness. So the whole gift would have been to encourage you to live long and happily, which is very nice.
Yes.
And beautifully made around 1900, so quite late, and it could have been bought by this man when he was in Japan.
Yes.
What he would have paid then would have been a relatively small amount. But at auction today, this would make easily £2,000 to £3,000. And it's a cracking bit. Lovely, beautifully made.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing it.
My great-uncle travelled on the Grand Tour of the Far East sometime between 1900 and 1920, I suppose.
Yes.
And he brought back a great number of artefacts from the East.
The first thing any visitor to Japan has to bring back is some souvenir of Mount Fuji.
Of course.
We've got a porcelain vase and we got a piece of enamel. Which of these two would you go for?
The vase.
The vase, this little vase?
Yes. I think that is absolutely exquisite.
Well, it's very nicely done, and it is covered in a celadon glaze with a bit of slip, just giving that suggestion of snow on the cap of Fuji. And there is the potter's mark. Well, you've chosen a very modest piece. That would not cost you more today than maybe £30.
Oh.
So would you have paid £35 for this, maybe?
Possibly, yes. I'm not as fond of that.
If you look around the edge of this, you'll see that it has an outline. The enamels are laid into an outline, or cloisons, as they're called. Technically, this is cloisonné, but the central part of this theme is done completely without wires. This is what the Japanese call the muzen. And there's one particular exponent of it, a man called Namikawa Sasuke, who's a highly prized worker in muzen enamel. I suspect this is by him. And if it weren't for the fact that there is a bruise on the corner, this little tray would not cost you £35, but today would have cost you somewhere in the region of £2,000, £3,000. But that bruise does make a difference.
I'm afraid so.
So knock off a naught. it's still more than your charming little vase.
Yes.
Choose a piece of Satsuma ware. Which of these two do you prefer?
The one with the wisteria inside.
The one with the wisteria.
Yes.
Well, let's have a look first at this one.
That's a cherry, I think.
And here you have a scene of people outside a large wheeled vehicle. I mean, this is a sort of Lord's Mayor procession in Japanese version. But this is not the one you want.
That's the one I wouldn't choose.
You want this one?
I would choose the other one.
Why?
Because of the wisteria inside.
This is the bit you like?
This is the part I like, yes.
The sparrows flying through wisteria.
That's right. I have that in my garden, and it looks beautiful.
It is gorgeous.
So it's sentimental, really, you know.
Well, if I tell you, of these two pieces, you prefer the second.
Yes.
If I tell you the first of these
It's the more valuable.
is worth somewhere in the region of £200 to £300.
Yes.
The second one is by a man called Yabumezan. This is the one you've chosen.
That's the one I would like, yes.
This is worth somewhere between £2,000 and £3,000.
Really? Fantastic.
You've got the right piece.
I got the right one.